The homeless man you fed wasn't a victim. He was your father's deadly insurance. And now the federal agents who actually caught your boss are locking their sights on you as the final evidence. The rain was a relentless curtain against the diner window, mirroring the gray sludge in my own soul. I was scraping by, working double shifts, trying to keep the lights on in a shoebox apartment. But every Tuesday, without fail, I saw him. Under the flickering neon sign of the old laundromat across the street, huddled in a thin, stained sleeping bag, his eyes, when they met mine, held a terrifying emptiness. I started small, a lukewarm coffee, a day-old pastry wrapped in a napkin. Then it became ritual. After my graveyard shift ended at 4 a.m., I'd buy 2 meals from the diner, one for me, one for him. I never asked his name. He never offered it. He just nodded, a deep, shaky nod that spoke volumes about gratitude and despair. I called him the ghost in my head. He was invisible to everyone else in this city, but I saw him. I chose to see him. For 6 months, this was my secret. Silent act of rebellion against the crushing weight of my own poverty. It was my penance, my strange, small way of proving I hadn't completely hardened yet. I told my best friend Maya once, just a hint. She'd looked at me with that pitying smile she reserved for my good deeds. "You're going to get hurt, Chloe. People like that. They're unpredictable." I ignored her. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was helping keep a flickering ember alive in a very dark world. One night, a blizzard hit. I couldn't leave him there. I broke my own rule. I approached his usual spot carrying a thermos of scalding soup and a thick, borrowed wool blanket. "It's too cold," I whispered, my breath fogging instantly. He was shivering violently, his skin shockingly pale. He looked up, and for the first time, he didn't look empty. He looked alert, frightened. He took the soup, clutching the thermos like a lifeline. "Thank you." His voice was a raw croak. "You have no idea." "I know it's not much," I said, draping the heavy blanket over his shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar and something metallic. He gripped my wrist then, his touch surprisingly firm, electric. His eyes, a startling clear blue even in the gloom, locked onto mine. "Chloe," he breathed. My heart seized. I hadn't told him my name. I was sure of it. "How—" He cut me off, urgency overriding his exhaustion. "Listen to me. You have to leave the city, tonight. Don't pack anything. Don't call anyone. Just go west." I pulled back, my common sense screaming. This was the moment Maya warned me about, the unpredictable turn. "What are you talking about? Are you okay?" He didn't answer. Instead, he fumbled inside the blanket, pulling out a small, heavy object wrapped crudely in oilcloth. He pressed it into my hand. It felt cold, dense, and strangely familiar, like something I'd seen in an old movie. "They know I took it," he whispered, glancing frantically down the street, though no cars were moving in the snow. "They'll trace everything back to the last person who showed me kindness. You showed me kindness. This buys you time. Get rid of this far away from here and then disappear." Before I could process the weight in my palm or the sheer terror in his voice, the air was ripped apart by the screech of tires on ice. 2 black, unmarked SUVs materialized out of the swirling snow, headlights blinding, blocking the street in both directions. Heavy boots crunched on the sidewalk. Men in dark tactical gear spilled out, moving with terrifying, practiced silence. The ghost shoved me hard towards the alley beside the laundromat. "Run! Don't look back!" I stumbled, dropping the soup, clutching the wrapped object to my chest. As I scrambled into the shadows, I heard one of the figures bark a command, his voice distorted by a radio mic. And then a sickening, wet thud from where the ghost had been standing. I didn't dare look. I just ran, heart hammering against my ribs, the heavy package digging into my palm. I burst onto the next avenue, slipping on the ice, the sounds of the confrontation fading behind me. I was halfway down the block, gasping for air, when I realized I couldn't feel my fingers anymore. I stopped under a sputtering street lamp, forced my shaking hand open, and tore away the oilcloth. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't money. It was a microdrive, encased in titanium, glowing faintly green, attached by a thin wire to a small, sophisticated listening device. And etched onto the titanium casing in microscopic script were 3 letters that turned my blood to ice. MISC? That was the code name for the internal investigation into the massive corporate espionage ring that had collapsed our entire firm last year. The same investigation that had cost my father his career and sent him into a downward spiral. This wasn't about a homeless man. This was about everything I thought I'd left behind. And then I heard footsteps behind me, not running, but measured, deliberate strides. I spun around just as a figure stepped out of the shadow of a parked delivery van. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a tailored suit, holding a sleek, silenced piece of illegal weapon, and smiling that familiar, predatory smile. It was my former boss, Mr. Sterling, the man who'd sworn he'd protect my family. "Hello, Chloe," he said smoothly, raising the weapon. "You shouldn't have interfered with the retrieval, especially when what you're holding proves your father was involved in more than just poor bookkeeping. Now, hand over the evidence." My scream died in my throat, choked by the sheer impossibility of the scene unfolding. Sterling. Here. Not some anonymous operative, but the man who used to send my father holiday cards. His calm demeanor was far more terrifying than the masked men in the snow. "Sterling? What are you talking about? My father is gone. He didn't—" I stammered, my mind racing wildly, trying to fit this new grotesque piece of the puzzle into the shattered image of my life. He took a slow step closer, the movement smooth, predatory. "Oh, Chloe, you always were too loyal for your own good. Your father didn't just lose his job. He was the linchpin for the entire data extraction. He just got sloppy about the final handover. A sloppy man who needed his naive daughter to clean up his mess." He nodded toward the drive in my hand. "He set this whole thing up, darling. He knew they'd come for the drive. He just needed a distraction, someone they wouldn't immediately suspect, a saint feeding the poor." The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The ghost wasn't a random victim. He was bait, and I was the delivery mechanism my father had unwittingly, or perhaps intentionally, primed. "No," I whispered, shaking my head, refusing the narrative he was weaving. "He wouldn't use me. He wouldn't put me in danger." "He put you where you think you're safe," Sterling corrected, his smile never wavering. "And now you're going to give me that drive, and we can pretend this little encounter never happened. I'll even make sure the authorities believe your involvement was purely accidental, perhaps some minor property theft." My survival instincts, honed by months of scraping by on adrenaline, finally kicked in, overriding the shock. I didn't trust him. If he was here, it meant the shadowy organization, the network tied to the MIS, was far more pervasive than I could have ever imagined. They weren't just a rival corporation. They were woven into the very fabric of the city's elite. I took a sharp step backward, pressing myself against the cold brick wall of the warehouse district. "You said my father was involved. If he was, then this drive belongs to him. Why are you retrieving it?" Sterling sighed dramatically, like a parent dealing with a difficult child. "Because, Chloe, your father wasn't working for us anymore. He got greedy. He tried to leverage the proprietary algorithms against us, a betrayal we simply couldn't forgive. The man feeding him information, the ghost, as you called him, was our insurance policy. We knew he'd talked to the one person who seemed completely harmless." He raised the weapon slightly. The metallic sheen caught the pale streetlight. "Last chance." I looked down at the drive. This little piece of hardware was the truth, the bomb that could expose every lie my father had told me in his final desperate years. But if I handed it over, Sterling would silence me permanently, eliminating the only loose end. I made a split-second decision driven purely by adrenaline and a sudden burning need to know the whole truth, no matter how ugly. I hurled the drive not at him, but past him, toward the mouth of the dark, narrow alleyway behind where Sterling stood. Sterling reacted instantly, pivoting with unnatural speed to track the projectile, expecting me to bolt in the opposite direction. "Foolish girl," he snarled, starting to run after the drive. That was my opening. I didn't run away. I ran toward him. I slammed my shoulder into his midsection just as he reached the alley entrance. The impact was jarring, but the element of surprise worked. He grunted, his balance thrown, and the weapon discharged, the sound muffled but deafening in the night air. The bullet didn't hit me. It struck the brick wall inches above my head, sending a shower of dust and mortar down. We wrestled clumsily on the slick pavement. Sterling was stronger, years of controlled violence informing his movements, but I was fighting for a life I suddenly realized was utterly forfeit if I lost this fight. I clawed desperately at his face, catching his expensive tie and yanking hard, pulling him off balance. He stumbled, tripping over a discarded pallet, and crashed down hard, the weapon skittering several feet away. I scrambled for it, my fingers inches from the cold steel, when I heard a sound that froze my blood even colder than the winter air. It wasn't Sterling getting up. It was a low, guttural hiss, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing right beside me in the shadows of the pallet. I froze, looking past Sterling's downed form. Staring back at me from the darkness illuminated by the street lamp wasn't another hitman. It was the ghost. He wasn't dead. His face was slick with grime and something darker, and his eyes, those terrifyingly clear blue eyes, were no longer empty or frightened. They were utterly focused. He held a shard of broken glass, jagged and long, gripped tightly in his fist. He ignored Sterling entirely. He didn't even acknowledge the gun lying 10 feet away. He just stared at me. The supposed savior, the one who brought him soup. Then, the ghost smiled, a slow, horrifying reveal of broken teeth, and whispered, not to me, but as if reciting a cold contract, "The package is secure. Payment rendered." Before I could scream, before Sterling could even recover enough to stand, the ghost lunged, not toward Sterling, but straight at me, the shard of glass flashing wickedly in the sodium light, aiming not for my torso, but directly for the small, sensitive spot on my neck. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of noise and pain. The ghost moved with inhuman speed, the intent in his clear blue eyes terrifyingly absolute. I didn't have time to dodge. I only had time to react. My hand, still grasping nothing where the micro drive should have been, instinctively shot up to deflect the attack. The glass shard sliced across my forearm, a blinding flare of white-hot agony, but the movement disrupted his aim just enough. Instead of severing my carotid artery, the blade raked across my shoulder, ripping fabric and flesh in a deep, ragged furrow. I cried out, stumbling backward, clutching the wound, blood immediately soaking through my thin shirt. Sterling, finally regaining his footing, looked from the bleeding, strangely composed ghost to me, then back to the alley entrance where the first wave of tactical men had disappeared. He seemed utterly confused by this unexpected internal betrayal. "What the hell is this, Lucas?" Sterling roared at the ghost, finally using a name. "She was the drop point. She had the drive." The ghost, Lucas, didn't respond to Sterling. He stepped over the pallet, his gaze fixed solely on me, his smile gone, replaced by an expression of cold, detached accomplishment. He gestured towards the spot where he'd been sitting, near the laundromat wall. "He lied to you, Chloe," Lucas said, his voice now steady, chillingly clear. "Your father didn't set this up to save himself. He set this up to ensure this got into the hands of the right people." He reached inside the torn, bloodied remains of the wool blanket I had given him, the blanket that now smelled faintly metallic, and pulled out the titanium casing, the micro drive. My breath hitched. I hadn't thrown the drive at all. In my panicked state, clutching the heavy object, I must have dropped the empty oilcloth wrap, while the ghost, Lucas, had silently retrieved the actual drive from his own hidden pocket during our clumsy scuffle. He had used my confusion, my desperate act of defiance, to stage his own escape and secure the target. "I wasn't bait," Lucas stated, his eyes sweeping over the chaos. "I was the cleaner. Your father realized the extent of Sterling's betrayal, the attempt to frame the entire operation on his own family. He knew Sterling would kill anyone, including you, to tie up loose ends. Lucas turned his attention fully to Sterling, who was now reaching for the discarded weapon, his handsome facade completely shattered, revealing the killer underneath. "The drive holds everything, Sterling," Lucas continued, holding the drive up so the street lamp caught the faint green glow. "The internal communications, the shell corporations, the payments linked directly to the MIS Oversight Committee, including your personal authorization codes for the offshore accounts." Sterling snatched the gun, training it squarely on Lucas. "You think a bit of old data can stop me now? I'll erase you both." "No," Lucas said softly. He tapped the side of the titanium casing twice, sharply. "I already sent the ignition key." Before Sterling could pull the trigger, a new sound dominated the night. The screaming, high-pitched whine of a siren that didn't belong to the local police. It was loud, institutional, and rapidly approaching from every direction. The black SUVs that had cornered the location minutes ago were suddenly surrounded by official, unmarked government vehicles bearing the seal of the Federal Oversight Agency, the department dedicated to prosecuting high-level corporate treason. Lucas hadn't been working for Sterling, or even my father's enemies. He had been working for the other side, the enforcement agency my father had clearly been feeding information to, using me as a seemingly unwitting conduit to prove his loyalty, or perhaps his innocence. The ghost wasn't a criminal, he was an undercover asset. Sterling looked paralyzed, the gun wavering as the federal agents flooded the street with blinding spotlights. He knew he was caught in the net he himself had cast. Lucas looked at me one last time, his expression shifting from cold professionalism to something almost regretful. My shoulder was throbbing, my entire body shaking, but the fear was slowly being replaced by a terrible, cathartic clarity. "Go get help, Chloe," Lucas murmured, taking a final step back, melting toward the shadow where the federal agents were now descending on a sputtering Sterling. "Your father made his choice. Justice, ugly as it is finally coming." As the agents swarmed Sterling, securing him with practiced brutality, I stood there, bleeding onto the cold pavement, clutching my wounded arm. The ghost was gone again, absorbed back into the shadows, his mission accomplished. I looked down at my hand. The blood mixing with the grime, the reality of the violence I'd witnessed, was overwhelming. I was alive, exonerated by the turn of events, but irrevocably changed. Then, through the ringing in my ears, I heard a voice, official and clipped, speaking into a radio just 10 feet away from me. "Subject Alpha secured. Preliminary assessment. Subject Beta, the civilian female, is wounded but mobile. Retriever. She needs immediate debriefing. She was the last known contact point for the asset, and she still holds the initial physical evidence." My heart sank into my stomach. They weren't letting me go. My nightmare hadn't ended with Sterling's arrest. It had just been handed over to a different, perhaps even more ruthless authority. I looked around desperately for an escape, but the ring was already closing. 2 stern-faced federal agents were already striding toward me, their hands hovering near their own sidearms. I had survived the trap, only to walk directly into the investigation.